Hello, everybody. My name is David Burns. I'm the moderator for our session today, entitled Trust in the Age of Digital Transformation. I have an excellent panel with me today who I'd like to have each person introduce themselves. Perhaps, Adrian, we can start with you.
Thank you very much, David. So, Adrian Kaczynski, I'm the Cybersecurity Business Unit Director at Komar. So, Komar is a software vendor who works globally. I'm responsible for the cybersecurity business unit. Actually, we do deliver solutions for all the sectors there are today. So telco, financial, healthcare, public administration, services, and pretty much all there is. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for 15 years. So I think I've seen some of the stuff already. I'm here to share some of the recent, at least, activities and the recent experience that we have.
Great. Tony, tell us about your background, please.
Yes, thank you. Very shortly, I'm Tony Kylberg. Kylberg is very hard to pronounce for an English-speaking audience, so that's Kylberg, maybe. I'm the CSO and CISO for SEB Group since 4 or 5 years back, and I'm really happy to be here.
John.
Yes, thanks for having me on this panel. I work for Signicat. Signicat is a qualified trust service provider according to EIDAS. So this is focus for us. My focus is on the identity side. We help with the onboarding and doing digital identity. And I've been involved in digital identity in one form or another for probably 25 years now. So my focus on trust would be from the identity perspective.
That's great. Thanks, gentlemen. And my background is I've been in software and technology for 25 years, originally from Palo Alto, California, as you can tell from my horrible accent. But I'm very pleased to be with you today. My role today is the Chief Revenue Officer of Napier, which is an intelligent compliance, anti-money laundering capability here in Europe, but we have customers globally. So, gentlemen, let's start the conversation with our topic. With our title, Trust in the Age of Digital Transformation, and your backgrounds, what does that mean to you, especially as it pertains to the word trust? Adrian, let's start with you.
Yeah, so trust is a very wide word. Right? I mean, it's mutual approach. So you have to trust the other side. It's always two people involved in trust, right? So from what we are dealing with, the trust is always towards in the online and the digital era, let's call it. Trust is always towards the service provider and the user itself. Now, what we are, what I'm facing, what I'm dealing with is actually the subject of trusting the other party is actually the party that pretended to be at the onboarding stage. So for me, it's like, can I trust the user? Is it actually the same user he was before? Is it the same person? Is it just an attack like a credential stuffing? Is it stolen password attack? Does some hacker took over the control over the workstation or the mobile device? So can I trust this person is actually legitimately the same person that he pretended to be, or is it someone else? And this is one of the key aspects. I mean, in the digital era, there's always some remote access. There's no direct interaction. I mean, in rare cases, you can have a video chat, you can have some interaction with human to human, but most of the time it's human to machine, like a server or any software that's running on the other side of the cable, right? So in this point of view, I can see a trust like, can I trust this person? Can I trust the user? And the other way around, I mean, for the user, can I trust that actually this service provider is the one who pretended to be? Or is it like a phishing attack or any other man-in-the-middle attack, right? So that's the trust in the digital era, as I would put it.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. And Tony, what are your thoughts on that topic?
I think that, being a bank where we have sort of a kind of a generic product, and it's also on top of that digital, it's absolute key to have trust from our customers, because that is, it's also competition means to have trust, because that is what we can use to differ between our peers and ourselves. And then again, I think that trust shouldn't be a competition thing. It's something that you as a customer, you shouldn't have to think about it. It should be there. You should be able to trust your bank. So I think it's really key in everything we do to instigate trust to our customers.
Yeah, well said. And John, I think you have some points of view about the history of trust. Well, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think it's, to to put it in a perspective. I mean, if you look at sort of the trust journey throughout the ages, it started out in the village. Like, we lived in small communities. Everybody knew each other, and if you didn't, you could, ask somebody would know that person, etc. So it was sort of trust in the village based on that face to face, and people knew each other. Then we came to trust in brands, right? You would trust Volvo because they made great cars, or you would trust Sony because they made great TVs or cameras or whatever. So you had this brand trust, and that's what you used. Now we are more in the, I would call, digital or distributed trust, which is more challenging. And we sort of just started into that, and that's what we struggle so much with it. I mean, Uber is an example of that, Airbnb. I mean, we connect people across. We not really trust brands, and we don't have the village. We live in people's houses, and we have never seen or met them. We drive with somebody in their car, etc. So that's the distributed and the digital trust. On the trust side, I think one standard to mention that's interesting is the EIDAS. The EIDAS is the standard for EIDs and trust services. That's S in EIDAS. And it's about defining these trust services, like electronic signatures, electronic seals, web certificates, and that sort of thing. So it's interesting to see standard coming. And EIDAS is still just in version 1, but I mean, there's ongoing work to see an EIDAS 2. So there is ongoing work on this, and there's a lot of people working on, what is trust? How do we handle it?
Yeah, another great point. And maybe along the lines of the village analogy, John, that you made, how have various countries and regions adopted the innovations available to improve trust? Certainly some unique things in Sweden, but as we go across Europe or even far abroad, what have we seen that's working or not working or creating challenges there? Adrian, I think you have some points of view on that.
Yeah, actually, I think there's a very interesting direction in the Switzerland regarding the remote access and the trust put to that. So in Switzerland, there's a regulation saying that a worker of a financial institution, of a bank, cannot access the financial data of the clients from out of the Switzerland, so being abroad. And I think this is a very nice regulation, very local, probably. But then on the other hand, there's a question how to support that. And I think a very nice way to support that particular regulation is the technology that you can use to make sure that actually this happens. So I really like the approach that they have to correlate for instance, the IP address and the geolocation that can be reversed from this IP address with the GPS reading from the device and with the address of the mobile device itself. So by correlating all of those aspects from the technical standpoint, you can, for instance, detect the cases where IP address seems to be from Switzerland. However, the user is located by GPS, for instance, in China or any other country, and this might be a yellow light, like a warning light. So something's wrong here, right? Or the other way around. You can see a manipulated GPS reading but the IP address will be showing China. So this is actually a very good example of that. So and on top of that, you can support this technology with additional countermeasures. So detect, for instance, debugging rooted devices. And this technology can support the trust to the end user.
Absolutely. It also prevents any sneaky holidays on lockdown, right? They'll always know, they know where you are.
Oh, yes, definitely. So this is good for the company workers, but for the end users, this might be a little bit too much. However, it depends on the privacy level of the end user, right? I mean, if you want to make sure, you have to put the sacrifice of your privacy. Sorry, I mean that's with the trust. I mean that's the downside of the trust, right? Today.
Absolutely. And maybe Tony, with the wide regional presence that
I think it's in the Nordics we are very sort of trustful towards authorities, towards each other, and towards companies, which is basically a good thing. But when it comes to cybersecurity, I think it's sometimes it's a little bit of a problem, and it's we have in the Nordics, and especially I would say in Sweden, with the products like Swish and Bank ID, we are on a decently high digitalized level, but that also creates a number of possibilities for the dark side to use sort of these products, not specifically the ones I mentioned, but products in general, and all of that more or less when it comes to fraud relies on the fact that you need some social engineering to sort of conduct the crime, and if we tend to be a little bit more trustful than the average, I think we are more vulnerable to digital fraud as well. So it's not only for good.
Yeah, I mean, I just second what you say about the Nordics. I mean, you mentioned Sweden, but the Nordics in general. Hey, welcome back, David. We lost you for a second, so
Good to see you. We were a bit worried that we should both put the questions and have some really good answers to them.
Yeah. So no, I mean, talking about the Nordics. I mean, sometimes living here, we forget how far advanced we are in trust and use of digital services. I spend a lot of time outside the Nordic talking about this, talking to customers, to partners, analysts, and tell them the story about Nordics, where we use our bank ID, 5 to 7, 9 times per week for all kind of different purposes, and the coverage is 80-90%. And I mean, we sign documents. I'm sure you have signed electronic documents. I've used my bank ID twice today already. So I mean, it's part of our lives. We don't really think about it, and we tend to forget how far advanced we are in that area. If you go outside the Nordics, well, we see things happening in the Benelux area. There are some increase there of IDIN and DigID in the Netherlands, and It's Me. We see some take up in Germany, but still they're pretty far behind and are pretty amazed with what we've done here. And it's back to what you say. We have high trust. I mean, you could take a look at a website called ourworldindata.org and look at trust, which is one of the interesting parameters. And you will see the Nordics are very high on trust. Trust between people, trust in government, trust in bank, trust in police, etc. So that's an advantage. But also, as you mentioned, of course, that could make you more vulnerable to fraud. We might be too trusty in some cases. And of course, we see some cases where that's happening as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, John. And I think it'll be interesting to see how other countries and regions are able to adopt some of the great trust backbone and capabilities that exist in the Nordics, right? Because I think it is quite unique and a model that other countries and regions could certainly follow. How do we think the increase in data traffic has led to the rise of trusted digital ID and the cloud security perspective? John, what are your thoughts about that?
So, I mean, we've seen a lot of changes now during COVID-19, of course. We have gotten a lot more people online. We've gotten a lot of inexperienced people online. And we have to do this thing digitally. And of course, that increases the traffic, and that increases the usage, and that increases all the challenges. As a company, we see an increased request for electronic signatures, of course, because people cannot show up in a branch to do it. They have to do it remotely. But this creates challenges as well, because we get so many inexperienced people out there, both as customers, but also as employees working from home, and they are easy targets. I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of a fraudster, I mean, they are running a business and looking at business opportunities like the rest of us, and say, oh, wow, all these inexperienced people, this is, a great attack vector for us. I think, impersonation fraud has about doubled during COVID. So there's, they're using this opportunity, which is a challenge for us, trying to protect and trying to build this trust.
Yeah. Tony or Adrian, any thoughts on that topic?
I mean, I've read some statistics, and I think those are relevant here. Statistics regarding the number of attacks, and this is quite interesting, because as it turns out, during the COVID, for instance, there was some time that the production was significantly lower. I mean, all the places that the manufacturer is going, so there were less shipments, less requirements from the market, and there was some significant amount of people who was without the work. And after that, I mean, it's always like the tendency to have some new initiatives, for instance, in cybersecurity. And this is something that actually begins to be a trouble, because on one side you have people who have no work and they are looking for some new opportunities, and on the other hand you have increased demand for remote access, for remote work. So new challenges, new vulnerabilities probably, and it might be more people interested in exploiting those new possibilities. So this tendency might be very bad. I think those were the statistics from like half a year ago. So I'm not sure how does it look like today. Hopefully better. But if this tendency will be kept, I mean, this might be a global problem, right?
Indeed. I think let's maybe take this a slightly more, I would say dark direction, but to a different turn here. With the challenges with digital trust, we talk about responsibility and liability. Tony, with your law background, how do you see this from sort of a legal perspective of when trust is broken or there is something that goes on there, who has the burden of responsibility and where is the liability in that type of scenario?
I think this is a challenge. It's not impossible to overcome, but of course, towards the end customer, it will always be sort of the one delivering to the end customer that will be responsible in that relationship, and then the sub-supplier delivering to the bank, for example, will have that relationship will be regulated separately. But what I can see as a challenge, if I were sort of working with starting a startup fintech, and I have, for example, a new digital identification tool that I want to take to the market, to figure out sort of both from a regulatory side, but also in the agreement between the parties, how to sort of distribute both responsibility and liability could be a nightmare, because that tool could be used for, it could be used for very high level transaction that involves high amount of money, but it could also be used for more volume business, where you have a huge volume of transactions, which by themselves are pretty small. And then, of course, it's very large difference in how you should regulate sort of your liability, responsibility, and price models to fit into those markets. So that is definitely a challenge. But then again, I mean, the existing legislation is also applicable, even though this has a digital nature. But there are new sort of complexity coming into the area.
Right, and I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, liability is an interesting issue, and especially when you're looking at distributed and decentralized systems. I mean, when you're setting up, I mean, it's very popular to talk about systems where there is no central authority. You distribute across many entities, and you know the distributed ledger technology is part of this. And you know, the question is always, okay, if there's a bug in this software that causes me to lose money, who's liable in that case? And you know, there are not really any good answers to those kind of questions. And I mean, again, looking at Bitcoin, for example, which is based on this, I mean, if there is something goes wrong and I lose my money, sorry, there nobody has responsibility for reimbursing me for that.
And yet it still goes up to the moon. It just defies logic, doesn't it? I don't
Yeah,
think
but I mean,
people.
every week I see, you know, some sort of post or somebody lost their Bitcoin, and you know, how do I get it back, or I transfer to the wrong account, or I mean, the worst example was the Canadian Bitcoin exchange, right, where the CEO died and he was the only one with a private key, and you know, those kind of challenges as well, which is, you know, again, who is liable in that case? Well, that was the company, of course, but in the other cases, if I happen to transfer to the wrong account and things like that, well, nobody to help me in those distributed systems, and that's where I think we need some more thinking around how do we handle that liability in a distributed / decentralized system.
Well, that is almost a perfect natural segue into mandating and regulating the liability. So what role do the regulators play here, and how can they help bring consistency, comfort, and security for the consumer, but also potentially some protection from business for being completely liable for anything that somebody could do at the other end? What role does regulation have in monitoring or providing best practices in this area? What are your thoughts, John?
So we definitely need regulations, right? We can't let the market flow wild. We see what happens then. So we need to regulate, and that's, you know, the task of the governments and the regulatory bodies to put in place regulations. And I mean, we see GDPR coming out, which is focused on the privacy of people's personal data, how that's used. Unfortunately, what most of us see of that are all these extremely irritating pop-ups that, you know, that you, I mean, I want to do something, right? And I get this pop-up and do you agree to this? It's, you know, even worse than the cookie law that came that needs to show the cookies, and we have that one as well. So that's what I've seen of that one. AML, same thing, right? It's I don't really see that, and most people are not really aware of that. But that's, I mean, the consequence of AML is collecting all this personal data, and people are reluctant to give it away, which causes a lot of people to abandon during the onboarding phase. I mean, we've shown that as high as 63% of people abandon during that onboarding phase. One challenge, I think, also is what are the penalties for breaking the regulations? I mean, there's been some really bad AML breaks lately, and there have been big fines to banks. And I mean, we all have heard of these stories, and banks been fined. But the problem is, you know, if this is a fine, it's just being written off to the net result, and they keep on business as usual. And of course, if the work to comply and the cost of complying is higher than the fine, well, you know, it's easy peasy. And that makes me think of the SOX regulation that came back in 2002, where it put personal liabilities, right? As a CEO, you would have personal liability up to 20 years in jail if this regulation was not followed. And I think that will really change the discussion in the boardroom. Is this, you know, just write off on the next year's net result, or do I have to go to jail? So, you know, enforcement of the regulations is an interesting part of this.
That is if I just can chip in, I think this is a interesting discussion as well, because of course every company, it doesn't matter if it's a bank or any other company, but I think it's of course everybody needs to do whatever they can to prevent crime, but there is also a limit to how far can you go. It's a little bit like saying to the chief of police that next year there shouldn't be any crime committed in a specific country and it's your responsibility. And what we need to remember is that the company that are at the same time penalized are also a victim of the crime. And that is something that I think sometimes is forgotten. Having said that, of course, we all have a responsibility to try to help the society to sort of mitigate the consequences of crime. But still, it's a little bit of a it's a hard discussion, I think, because sometimes it's forgotten that there are two victims on this, and one is the company that we're talking about as well.
Yeah. And do you see much regulatory movement or action in what you're seeing, Adrian?
So I must say that kind of referring to what John said, I mean, if you take a look at the regulations from the user perspective, it's like, oh my God, another pop-up, right? You can't see actually how it works because it works in the background. As you said, it's the GDPR, it's the SOX, it's the PSD2, for instance, regulation, which is, I think, very nice regarding the financial institutions. I mean, it makes it easier for the user, for the certain people to understand some things. So I think it's actually very it's not easy for the end person to actually appreciate the regulations. I mean, we deal with it. We the guys who work for the service. We make the service. We see it. People don't tend to see it. I mean, people tend to see the pop-ups, right? So I think personally, I actually appreciated the regulations when I had the bill from my bank at the end of the year, and there was a position which said these are all the costs that we charged you with all the banking services. And when you have the costs across time, it's like, okay, this month it's €2, then it's €3 or €5, and then in the end of the year, it's like, okay, there are some significant amount of costs to running my account, right? And then you can see one bank, the other bank, and the third one, and you can just compare that and say, hey, I like this bank the most because it doesn't charge me with a lot of costs. And this is an example of where you have more trust because of the regulations, right? You know what's doing, you have the benefit of the regulation. On the other hand, I think, I mean, from my experience, from the technical point of view, the strong customer authentication which came with the PSD2, this is something that I personally like because I know there's a certain amount of trust and it's enforced by the technicalities, right? So I really appreciate that. I appreciate the other regulations that say you have to run penetration tests on a regular basis because I know this also. I mean, it's not obvious, but this is the part of the chain of trust, right? If you know that the certain service provider runs the tests, you can trust that it won't lose your data. There will be no data leak, and that's the real benefit, right?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the IDES standard and if you want to be a qualified trust service provider, I mean, you actually reverse the burden of proof. As a qualified trust service provider, you have to provide the proof that you do this in a trustworthy way and you protect the data and everything. So, and that's, also gives a good signal. Just a quick comment back to you. I mean, you talk about banks and you talk about, all this information. I mean, I personally would like to have some trust service provider handle this GDPR stuff for me, right? For example, banks are in general trusted, that we showed in a report we did. And what if I could tell my bank, hey, please monitor my moves, look at the GDPR, just, get rid of all these pop-ups for me, you watch them. If I'm about to do something stupid, then flag me and tell me, or, then send me a report afterwards, you did this, are you sure you want to continue with that, etc. And I think most people don't want to do all this work themselves. And I would gladly, have somebody I trust to do that monitoring, to watching my back, what I'm doing online, and then having GDPR, as a center, trusting, that my personal data is not revealed where it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, this actually, yes, this is, I mean, you trust the bank in general. I mean, you have some relationship with the bank, right?
Yep.
And this is, banks are by nature trustworthy, right? So definitely there's an entity that you can use to elevate the trust. And there's an entity who already has the technical knowledge and they have the experience regarding the legal stuff. I mean, yes, this would be definitely a benefit for the end user.
Right, and it's an opportunity for banks as well as the trusted entities to step in. As you say, they are trusted. Their main product is trust. You tend to think that the main product of banks is money, but it's not. It's trust. And I've been talking to banks for a long time about this. You need to step in and start going into this identity, helping people with that as well.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, Tony.
If I can add a last thing there, I think I can see two sort of positive trends. We see a lot more regulation coming in this area. And to be honest, most of us on a daily basis, we think regulations are a lot of pain and burden in our daily lives. But long term, they are very often beneficial for everyone and also helpful for you as a company. So that is good in itself. And then we also see that with the current threat landscape, the regulations, they are not coming that fast. So you can see that sort of the regulations is sort of the hygiene level. And then I would say that most companies within the financial industry today are sort of trying to get above that level. What do we need to do sort of to be able to look our customers in the eyes? And that takes it a little bit further, and then there comes a new regulation, and then sort of this. So I really think it's a positive spiral, since sort of trust and security has become a mean for competition as well. And as I said in the beginning, it shouldn't have to be that. In the best of worlds, I mean, it should be sort of obvious, or it should just be there. But while it's not, and it will never be there because we don't live in a perfect world, I think this is a really good trend and a good spiral. And what we must remember at the end is that the regulation and the legislation creates in itself trust, as you were into, John, because you know that there's somebody sort of controlling this, monitoring this, and handing out penalties if you don't behave. And trust in that sense, that is beneficial both for the society as a whole and for the companies delivering products in that market.
Agreed. Very, very well said. So I think we're kind of wrapping up here, and I'm just going to ask for you all to pull out your crystal ball and look into it to see what is the future, what is the next innovation in this area that we should be expecting or thinking about. You're all 60 years of experience here amongst the panel, not me excluded, in security and trust. What's the next thing? Tony, let's start with you.
Well, I think that we have seen quite a lot of, I would say, innovation during the last year due to the pandemic, because the need for being able to, for example, have new collaboration tools and so forth has increased tremendously. So there has been a really sort of a pressure to create this kind of innovation. And I don't see that this will diminish for the coming years. This will continue. I cannot see any real big bangs really. I think it's more of incremental improvements on already existing solutions. But then again, if I would have been able to predict the huge innovations, they probably wouldn't have been that huge innovations. So.
Well said. How about you, John?
So, I mean, looking at the identity space, there's a lot of work going on in that space, and it's going under several different names: self-sovereign identity, decentralized identity, distributed identity. But the whole point is to, distribute information. You don't have all this centralized. But one very important part is to select which information I want to share. So of course, for banks, I need to provide my full identity, but in other contexts, maybe I only want to share parts of my information. Only I'm working for Signicat, or I'm a male over 60 living in Norway or whatever. So that possibility to do that, and also we need to be able to do that in a face-to-face scenario. So I'm thinking specifically about vaccine certificates, which is very necessary right now, and it's proven you can buy forgeries online for 35 euros, proving that you have it, right? Unless if you're not too lazy to Photoshop it yourself. So we need ways to have a digital proof that I have the vaccine, and I need to be in a face-to-face situation, be able to show that to one of you guys that, hey, I actually have that in a secure way. So I think we're going to see some interesting developments in that space.
Great. Okay, Adrian, what's the last word on the future of digital trust? Help us out.
So I think in terms of the trust and security, I mean, wrapping it all together, what we already said. So I believe that from what we are facing and what I'm seeing today is that the usability of the systems is of paramount importance today. The usability, and this is the key aspect. So the security is always in the opposite of the usability, because it's always harder to make something secure and keep it at a good user experience, decent level, right? So I think that the security tools will evolve like CAPTCHA. I mean, the first CAPTCHA was you had to retype some distorted letters, right? Then you have to check the traffic lights or things like that, and now it's just like running in the background. And I believe it will be the same tendency with the security. So the security tools will be there, keeping it safe in the background, not involving the end user at all. And this will be probably the best user experience that you can imagine, because there will be just functionality, just business functionality, so services, and the security will be in the background. And this is, I think, the dream scenario, right?
Dream scenario. What a great way to end, everybody. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you for your time, and look forward to our next catch-up. Fantastic.
Thank you very much. It was a huge pleasure.
Thanks for having me on here.